Ladies and gentlemen, creatures of the night, and unfortunate souls who accidentally clicked on this video while searching for something educational, welcome. Today, I come to you in this ridiculous outfit to sink our teeth into one of the most hotly debated topics in horror history. Who was the best cinematic Dracula? Not the most historically accurate, not the most terrifying, just the best. Because, let's be honest, Dracula is less of a horror villain these days and more of a cinematic legacy that refuses to stay dead. Now, before you flood the comments section with, what about this guy and what about that guy and you forgot about this one? I know hundreds of actors have played Dracula. And I'm not about to do an exhaustive list because, well, I like to sleep. So, in this video, I'm only going to focus on some of my favorites, aka the ones that really suck in the best way possible. And we have to start with Bela Lugosi, because if I don't, Universal's lawyers will rise up from their crypts and haunt me. Bela Lugosi wasn't the first Dracula, nor was he necessarily the best, but he is the blueprint. That accent, that cape, those penetrating eyes. He made Dracula less of a bloodthirsty monster and more of a refined, sinister gentleman who would seduce you before draining your blood. And fun fact, Lugosi really wanted this role. He lobbied hard for it, even agreeing to be paid a mere $500 a week, which in today's money it's still a terrible paycheck for a Hollywood lead. Lugosi's love-hate relationship with the Count lasted decades, with him playing Dracula or Dracula-adjacent roles again and again, sometimes as a magician, sometimes in horror comedy, and sometimes in Plan 9 from Outer Space, where the scariest thing was the film's budget. Now next up is Christopher Lee. If Bela Lugosi was the classic Dracula, Christopher Lee was the spaghetti western version. He didn't smoke cigars or spit tobacco on his enemies, but he did squint at the sunlight like he had just walked out of a saloon. Lee played Dracula for Hammer Horror a lot. So much so that he tried to stop playing Dracula. But Hammer Studios, they had other plans. And according to Lee, they guilt-tripped him into continuing by telling him that if he quit, the whole production crew would lose their jobs. Yeah, talk about emotional blackmail. Lee's Dracula was dark, brooding, and sexy, which was a big deal, because until then, Dracula hadn't really been seen as sexy. Sure, Lugosi had the charm, but Lee brought raw sensuality to the role. He didn't just want to drink your blood. He made you want him to. And speaking of sexy, let's talk about Frank Langella. If Christopher Lee was Dracula's Clint Eastwood, Langella was Dracula's Mick Jagger. He played the role first on Broadway and then in the 1979 film, and he made Dracula smooth. Langella's take was less about horror and more about romance. Gone were the menacing glares and monstrous growls. This Dracula was sultry. A neck bite in his version wasn't just a bite. It was basically an orgasm. And while his delivery of the famous "I never drink wine" line wasn't as iconic as Lugosi's,
I never drink. Why?
The 1979 Dracula did have one of the most artistic depictions of vampire seduction ever put on screen. Let's just say, dragged fingernail across bare breast, chef's kiss. Then, we have Gary Oldman. He brought Dracula into the Gothic fever dream that was Bram Stoker's Dracula in 1992. Oldman said he took the role just so he could say the line, "I've crossed oceans of time to find you." And honestly, same. Coppola's film gave us the most human Dracula, one who was once a warrior king, damned himself through unspeakable acts, and was cursed to live forever. Unlike Lugosi, who captured the tragedy of an eternal existence, Oldman filled in why Dracula was so tormented. And let's not forget his many looks. We had the decrepit old man Dracula, the young Prince Charming Dracula, the literal bat monster Dracula, the werewolf Dracula, yes, that happened. This movie didn't just reinvent Dracula. It basically said, why stop at one version? Now, let's rewind to 1922 when Max Schreck played Count Orlok in Nosferatu, the first major Dracula adaptation. Except it wasn't technically Dracula, because the filmmakers didn't get the rights to Bram Stoker's novel, so they just changed the name. Stoker's widow sued, won, and almost every copy of the film was burned. Almost. Schreck's version of the Count wasn't suave. He wasn't seductive. He wasn't even human. He was a rat-like, hunched-back, claw-fingered nightmare that crawled out of a bad dream. He moved like a creature that had been surviving in the shadows for centuries, which led to the urban legend that Schreck was actually a real vampire. Honestly, I wouldn't rule it out. Now, if you were a kid in the 80s, your Dracula was probably Duncan Regehr. In Monster Squad, I think that's how you say his last name, Regehr. Now, this Dracula wasn't just scary. He was mean. He threw dynamite at children. He called a 5-year-old girl a bitch.
Give me the amulet, you bitch!
I mean, this wasn't your brooding romantic vampire. This was Dracula as a villain. And let's not forget one of the greatest discoveries in cinematic history in that film. The Wolfman's got nards. Now, let's lighten the mood with George Hamilton in Love at First Bite. This film gave us Dracula in New York City during the disco era. It had romance, comedy, and some of the best lines ever, like Hamilton's take on the classic Children of the Night speech. Children of the Night! Shut up! His Dracula, he never drinks wine, doesn't smoke, and has been wearing the same head waiter outfit for 700 years. But he made one thing clear. Without him, Transylvania would be as boring as Bucharest on a Monday night. And finally, we have Dracula 2000, where Gerard Butler plays Dracula as Judas Iscariot. Yes, that Judas. The film's big twist was that Dracula wasn't just some random undead guy. He was actually cursed for betraying Jesus. It was a unique take, sure, but let's just say Butler would go on to play better roles in his career. So who's the best Dracula? It depends. I mean, do you like classic Dracula? Lugosi's your guy. Want a brooding, violent Dracula? Go with Lee. Looking for romance? Langella. Theatrical tragedy? Oldman. Nightmare fuel? Schreck. Disco Dracula? Hamilton. But now it's your turn. Who's your favorite Dracula? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon, because you never know when Dracula will rise again from his coffin. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.